I want the soul.
Maybe the baddest of them all.
I sent my mom down there a couple times.
What is his threshold for pain?
November 27th, 1991. Detroit's Joe Louis Arena. Mark Calaway, 26 years old, is being handed the WWF Championship for the first time in his career, after pinning Hulk Hogan with a Tombstone Piledriver. A steel chair slid underneath Hogan's head by Ric Flair at the last possible second. The crowd doesn't know how to react. Nobody saw this coming. And as Calaway stands over the most famous body in wrestling history with the title belt in his hand, Hulk Hogan looks up at him and whispers 3 words, "Oh, you got me, brother." What happened in the next 6 days would change everything Calaway believed about the business he'd given his life to. And it would set the standard he'd enforce, with his words, his hands, and his entire presence, for the next 25 years. So the question is, what made The Undertaker the most feared judge of character in wrestling history? And what happened when 7 men fell short of the standard he'd built his career on? Let's go back to that locker room in Detroit. Hogan's neck story started before the match even happened. He told the young Calaway he had a pre-existing neck injury. He was nervous about the tombstone. He kept reminding him throughout the day, "Be careful, protect me, I'm trusting you." Calaway promised to take care of him, and he did. But the moment Hogan's back hit the canvas, everything changed. By the time they reached the backstage area, Hogan was on Vince McMahon's floor, calling for his wife and kids, with paramedics circling him like the building was on fire. Shane McMahon pulled Calaway aside and told him, "Your head never got close." The boys all said the same thing, and when Calaway watched the footage back, it confirmed what everyone else already knew. 6 days later, at a small show in San Antonio, Calaway confronted him directly. "Terry," he said, "I watched it back, your head never hit." Hogan's answer came without a pause. "Oh, brother, what it was, you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move, and that's what jammed my neck." That was all Calaway needed to hear. "I realized I know what you're all about," he later said, "and that's all I needed. My radar was always up any time I had to interact with him." The title was back on Hogan 6 days after Calaway won it, and the whole experience left a young wrestler wondering whether the man he'd just been accused of injuring had any intention of letting him succeed. The trust was gone before it had a chance to form. But Hogan was only the beginning. Less than 2 years later, Calaway was handed an assignment that would, by his own account, take years off his career. Vince McMahon looked at Jorge Gonzalez, billed at nearly 8 feet tall, a former professional basketball player with a body unlike anything professional wrestling had ever seen, and told his top star, "That's your guy." What followed across WrestleMania 9th and the summer of 1993 was less a rivalry and more a survival exercise. Gonzalez could not safely execute the most basic maneuvers. Calaway worked with him in the locker room before every appearance, demonstrating exactly where he needed to be hit, showing him the landing zone on his shoulder blades, telling him over and over, "I don't care how hard you hit me, just get the target right." Gonzalez kept missing. Instead of the shoulder blades, the strikes kept finding the back of Calaway's neck, sending stingers down his spine with every sequence. Giant Gonzalez, Calaway would say years later, made the great Khali look like Luthes. And when describing what it took to survive those months, "I was trying to make chicken salad out of chicken crap. I was killing myself." The Gonzalez program wasn't a competitive feud. It was an endurance test for one man, while the other barely understood the rules. So by the time Calaway's reputation had hardened into something undeniable, by the time the locker room understood what The Undertaker actually stood for, the question was never whether he'd enforce his standards. The question was whether anyone was foolish enough to make him. Shawn Michaels found out the answer on March 29, 1998. WrestleMania 14, Boston. The main event was Stone Cold Steve Austin challenging Michaels for the WWF Championship, and the entire wrestling world was holding its breath. Michaels had a documented back injury. Michaels also had a documented history of political maneuvering that had cost more than one opponent a clean outcome in a high-stakes match. The finish had been agreed on. Austin wins. The Attitude Era begins, but Calaway wasn't going to leave that to chance. He sat at the gorilla position, right at the curtain's edge, and he wrapped his hands with athletic tape while Michaels walked to the ring. The message was physical, deliberate, and impossible to misread. "I was sitting there with hands taped, ready to do whatever needed to be done. Calaway later confirmed. And privately, even after the two men repaired their friendship years down the road, he was honest about what was going through his mind that night. "The whole time I'm thinking, I was gonna smash you if you didn't drop that belt to Steve." Michaels dropped the belt. Austin's era began. And Calaway's role as the locker room's last line of enforcement became something the whole roster understood without a single public announcement. But enforcement isn't always about championships. Sometimes it's about showing up. Paul White had every physical gift that any man who ever laced up boots could dream of possessing. 7 feet tall, over 500 pounds. Athletic in a way that had no business being attached to a human frame that size. When he came to WWE from WCW in 1999, Calaway watched him and saw potential that bordered on criminal to waste. But White wasn't living up to it. The conditioning wasn't there. The urgency wasn't there. The drive to be what his physical tools said he could be simply wasn't showing up to work. It wasn't subtle, and Calaway wasn't interested in making it subtle. He believed in the work. He had zero patience for someone who treated his own potential like a background detail. To his credit, White listened eventually. Their relationship improved, and years later both men spoke about each other with genuine respect. But it took Calaway holding the line first. Which brings us to the night when that patience reached a different kind of limit entirely. September 23, 2001, Pittsburgh. The Brothers of Destruction, Calaway and Kane, were defending the WCW Tag Team Championship against the team known as Chronic, Brian Adams and Brian Clark. In the middle of WWE's sprawling invasion storyline, this was supposed to be one of the marquee matchups. Two of the biggest acts on the roster against a tag team that had been genuine stars in WCW. What it became was something else entirely. The match broke down almost immediately into a parade of miscommunication, missed spots, and visible frustration that the TV camera couldn't hide. Calaway's voice is audible throughout the broadcast, shouting, "Feed," when his opponents failed to set up the next sequence, barking instructions that turned a pay-per-view championship match into a live correction session. Chronic left WWE not long after. They had declined an assignment to WWE's developmental territory, and the company saw no path forward. The match has been analyzed and reanalyzed for over 20 years, not because of what the wrestlers intended, but because of what the footage made impossible to pretend away. Yet for all the drama of the ring, Calaway's conflict with CM Punk in 2009 began somewhere far more mundane. Punk was World Heavyweight Champion. He was doing what CM Punk does, dressing like CM Punk, traveling like CM Punk, carrying himself with the anti-establishment defiance that his entire character was built around. Calaway, as the locker room's senior figure, pulled him aside during a European tour. The other boys were getting heat for how talent was presenting itself on the road, and Calaway told Punk plainly, "You're the champion. You should consider dressing better when you travel." Punk's response was immediate. "What about Cena?" 3 words. Calaway didn't hesitate. "You're not Cena." That was supposed to be the end of the conversation. It wasn't. The friction got amplified through years of internet speculation. Rumors that the dress code confrontation had cost Punk politically, stories suggesting Calaway harbored genuine contempt for him. Calaway has addressed it directly in his own words. Their in-ring work together was, he said, perfect. The argument was never about hatred. It was about a standard that Calaway believed represented something larger than any individual, and a young champion who wasn't ready to accept someone else defining what that standard looked like. By 2019, Calaway was 54 years old, working select dates, trying to close a career on his own terms. And then came Saudi Arabia. January 7th, 2019, Jeddah, Undertaker versus Goldberg. The match ran roughly 8.5 minutes. It felt catastrophic from nearly the first exchange. Goldberg took a bad landing on an early spear, hit the ring post, and was immediately concussed, disoriented, unable to track his position in the ring or anticipate what came next. The jackhammer, Goldberg's signature finish, went wrong in the worst possible way. Calaway landed on his head and neck instead of his back, the kind of impact that ends careers or worse. Referee Mike Chioda later said he considered stopping the match entirely. The finish was accelerated, chokeslam, pin, done. Afterward, Calaway was direct about how close it had come. It was really close to being catastrophic. His wife Michelle McCool called it a train wreck. This wasn't a story about a man cutting corners or playing politics or wasting his potential. This was something Calaway had never faced quite the same way before. The moment when even the most experienced and most careful man in the building couldn't prevent what happened when a concussion took over and preparation ran out. So what do you do with 7 stories this different? Hogan's calculated deception and Gonzalez's terrifying physical incompetence. Mike was forced to honor a finish he might have preferred to avoid. Big Show coasting on gifts that Calaway believed demanded more. Crony collapsing on national television in real time. Punk and an argument about clothing that the internet quietly turned into something it never was. Goldberg and a near catastrophe that no amount of experience could have fully stopped. The honest answer is that these aren't really 7 stories about laziness. They're 7 stories about a man who treated professional wrestling as a craft with real consequences, and who made it known in every locker room he walked into for 3 decades that the consequences were not negotiable. Mark Calaway didn't carry the Undertaker character for 30 years because he was the most gifted performer in the building. He carried it because he was, by almost every account, the most committed. The man who understood that the moment you stop holding the standard doesn't lower, it disappears. 7 men encountered that standard at different points in their careers, for different reasons, with different results, but not one of them forgot what it felt like when they did.